So this week, Liam Rosenior has gone from Chelsea, and I think this is the least surprising story of this Premier League season. I said when he came in, and I think obviously a lot of people would have echoed this, but I don't think he gets that Chelsea job if he's not at Strasbourg. I think the links between Chelsea and Strasbourg obviously helped Rosenior get that job, but I don't think he gets the job even on a temporary basis if he's not at Strasbourg, and Chelsea and Strasbourg don't have that relationship. So straight away, a strange appointment. The other thing I said at the time, and again echoed by many people, is his biggest battle will be with the players. Because when a new manager walks into the dressing room, if they don't have either a stellar management career behind them or a stellar playing career, his biggest battle will be to win over the players. And while Rosenior had a very decent career, in terms of medals, there's no Champions League medals there. There's no Premier League medals there. And then from his management experience, again, there's no medals he can say, I've won the league with this team or I've won the Champions League with this team. So he was always going to face a massive uphill battle. Now, I'm not a Chelsea fan, but looking at it from the outside, that club just looks a mess. I'm not even talking about the ownership and anything like that. Just the squad itself, it looks so fractured. And this is before Rosenior came in. I struggle to name Chelsea's best 11 or even best 5 or 6 because of, even if they're all fit. So you've got obvious names, Cole Palmer, Enzo Fernandez, but like goalkeeper, I couldn't name you their number one goalkeeper because they seem to chop and change. Centre backs, defence, okay, Cucurella plays. So he was walking into a very difficult situation anyway, and it's not a surprise that one of the things that has come out is the Spanish contingent. Fernandez, Cucurella weren't happy with him. Obviously, they'd already been speaking about the club went on international duty, etc. So the whole appointment was just strange anyway, and it's not a surprise he's been sacked. Now, I'm just going to clarify, I don't mean that Gary O'Neill will be the next man in the hot seat just because he's at Strasbourg. And I think the reason for that is because obviously O'Neill's already been in the Premier League with Wolves and Bournemouth, and while relatively successful, obviously I'm not saying he's going to be in line, obviously, for the Chelsea role. So just a unique set of circumstances that brought Rosenior in. And while, I've got no doubts he's a good coach and a good tactician, etc. But if people don't listen to you, which is obviously one of the issues he had at Chelsea, then you're just not going to succeed. But what frustrates me is I look at Chelsea, and I had a debate with some Chelsea fans earlier in the season. I think it was around about December, January. And I know social media is not the best place to have a debate, but I think someone had put a post on about Chelsea had beaten PSG in the World Club Cup final. They'd beaten Liverpool in the Premier League, and they'd beat Barcelona in the league phase, the Champions League. And they were saying, well, Chelsea are the best team because they've beaten the league champions of all these and the European champions of the last 6 months. And I said, well, that's a ridiculous statement to make because if you go back to the beginning of last season and say to PSG, what would you rather win, the Champions League or the World Club Cup, the FIFA World Club Cup? You can only have one. 99% of PSG fans have been the Champions League. And while it was still a very decent PSG team that Chelsea beat in that FIFA World Club Cup tournament, it was a Mickey Mouse tournament. Some of the teams, I know what FIFA were trying to do in terms of some of the teams invited, but in terms of balance of European football, it was ridiculous. It's like, I don't know, cutting half the Premier League teams and inviting League Two teams and League One teams into a tournament, and calling it the best tournament in England. So the calibre of opposition, not all of it, wasn't great across the tournament. But you're also coming in at the end of a gruelling season. And PSG had already won what they wanted to win. So, don't get me wrong, PSG would have loved to have won that tournament. So to Chelsea to win that, but in the same within a couple of months or so of winning the Conference League, and they weren't exactly ripping the Premier League up. I had this debate with these fans, and I got quite a bit of abuse because I said all Chelsea have done is won a Mickey Mouse tournament and beaten some teams in non-important games. And obviously that was shown up when they played PSG in the Champions League for real and got ripped apart. Now, whether that happens under Enzo Maresca, I still think PSG would have won it, maybe not by the lopsided score that they did. But when I look at, this is, and it frustrates me how much football has changed, because Chelsea are, one of the reasons he's gone is because they're falling away from fifth badly. They're currently eighth. And it's unlikely that they'll turn it around to get fifth spot. And that's obviously the Champions League spot. And they've got an FA Cup semi-final coming up, a winnable one against Leeds. Now, I say winnable only because Leeds are on good form, but Chelsea theoretically should win it. But at this stage, it's not, it's not as clear-cut as it should be. But the FA Cup just doesn't mean anything anymore because there's no Champions League place on offer. And this is why he's gone. For whatever reasons you can give in terms of tactical, what I said about the winning over the players, the fact that they're not going to make the Champions League is the ultimate reason why he's gone. And I think what frustrates me is, you look at Sir Alex Ferguson is the prime example, but you look at Howard Kendall at Everton in the 80s. Howard Kendall had such a difficult start with Everton. They didn't really seem to improve much. They lost a very famous Merseyside derby at Goodison, 5-0. But it took a couple of seasons, but he got it right eventually. He won the FA Cup in '84. Obviously, slightly before that, there was a very famous League Cup game at Oxford where they won. So, kind of that late '83, early '84 period. And then he went on to build success. So the FA Cup in '84, League and Cup Winners' Cup in '85, and only the European ban on English clubs at the end of that season, in readiness for the '85-'86 season, kind of stunted Everton's growth a bit. Sir Alex Ferguson, another one, from '86 to '90, kind of early 1990, he was became under incredible pressure. And yet he wins the FA Cup and then goes on to build. Now, I'm not suggesting that Liam Rosenior would, potentially win the FA Cup this season if he's still in charge and then suddenly go on to bigger and better things. But I think this is a sad indictment of football now, and it has been for a while, that if you don't make Champions League, you're gone. It's why Arne Slot is under such pressure. It's not so much the title defence per se, although that's not been brilliant. It's the Champions League, because I felt that Slot potentially Liverpool board would have had a difficult decision to make if Liverpool can get, could have got through to the Champions League and past PSG and won it. But of course they've gone out. So, going back to Chelsea, the thing is, though, the last couple of seasons, they've not I could understand if Rosenior's gone because Chelsea have been in the last few seasons challenging for the title or something like that. But in the last few seasons, they finished fourth last season, sixth the season before, 12th the season before that, and then, a couple of third and fourth place finishes. So they're not exactly a team who, let's take Arsenal, for example. Arsenal are always finishing second, maybe third in the last couple of seasons. And they're always going to get Champions League, Arsenal, over recent seasons. It's just whether they can do the next bit and win the title. But Chelsea have always been in the last, 4 or 5 seasons on the periphery of the Champions League, if at all. But this kind of aspect of football now, where finances rule and Champions League rule and everything else is just, I think it's a sad indictment of modern football. You know, fifth place for a Champions League, it's ridiculous, and we all know that it's pushing to a European Super League. But you know, it's just difficult. You know, and while people who obviously are younger will look at this and go, "But what's the problem? Champions League is the be all and end all." Does that mean then the FA Cup just does not matter? Or do Chelsea genuinely believe that they've got a better chance of winning the FA Cup without Rosenior? I go along with the former. The FA Cup doesn't matter because what? It gets you into the Europa League. Nobody wants to be in that. And, you know, I'm not even going to go into Chelsea's ownership. There's obviously people out there, maybe yourself, who know more about Chelsea's ownership than I do. I mean, it looks a mess from the outside. But one thing, the last thing I'll say is something that struck me is at the Brighton game earlier in the week, some Chelsea fans had a banner, "We want our Chelsea back." And I was looking at that banner going, which Chelsea do you want back, though? Because is this the Chelsea up to kind of 2003 that, you know, had some success, you know, especially in the kind of the later part of the 90s with FA Cups and Cup Winners' Cups? Or do you want the Chelsea that was Abramovich's Chelsea, which I'm assuming they are referring to, you know, which was kind of 2003 onwards, and, you know, winning trophies, Champions Leagues, league titles. But then, even then, everything wasn't plain sailing. So I struggle to know what Chelsea people want back, and I'm assuming they just want the successful Chelsea, you know, the Abramovich era Chelsea, which, you know, they didn't quite do the dominance of Man City, but they were the Man City of their you know, day back in 2003, when, while they were a lot more successful than Man City before their takeover. Obviously, the takeover took them to that next level of challenging and winning league titles, and then obviously, eventually, the Champions League and, you know, other trophies as well. But it just makes me laugh. You know, for younger audiences, it's not, you know, that people will have grown up just with Abramovich's Chelsea. But as I say, when I see that banner of "We want our Chelsea back," I'm just like, well, which is it? Do you want a club that was truer to its roots? You know, and okay, they had a very stormy kind of period under Ken Bates. Or do you want that Chelsea where you were essentially just outspending everyone? Your money probably wasn't clean, and it was coming from sources, you know, within Russia. Is that what you want back? And, you know, I'll caveat this with, I assume they just mean the football side of it, the winning the trophies. Of course, any club wants, you know, the club I support, it's been under terrible ownership for quite a long time. We'd love to go back to what we had previously, even if it didn't mean winning trophies. We had stability. You know, we were a decent Premier League side, and obviously we are far from that these days. But before that, before we had a rich benefactor, we were just a middling, probably where we are now. You know, kind of not quite top division, you know, good enough for what was then the second division, which is now the Championship now. So, yeah. So it's not a surprise that Rosenior's gone, but I just don't like the fact that however much people want to dress it up, it is purely they haven't qualified for the Champions League and that's it. And I just don't like that aspect of football, because when a manager's ever going to been given enough time, Slot wins a league title for Liverpool, and then suddenly, you know, he'll be gone by the end of the season. Talk to Liverpool fans, you know, before Klopp. You know, a manager will win you a league title, and then next season you'll probably finish fifth. They'll go, we'll take that, because, you know, Liverpool went almost 30 years without a title, and now suddenly, because of the Klopp era, which was, you know, an amazing era for Liverpool, and the amount of titles Klopp should have won, Slot is obviously going to go at the end of the season. I'd be shocked if he stayed on. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with Chelsea. But I can't see. I hope Lampard doesn't go back. I know he's not, you know, I've seen Coventry this season. I can't see that he's going to keep Coventry up. But next season, obviously things might, you know, could surprise me. But I hope he doesn't make that mistake and go back to Chelsea, because he's already worked under this ownership. He was not a success at Chelsea, and I can't see him being a success again. So I hope he doesn't go back. So we'll leave it there. I did have the option when I was a lot younger of following Chelsea. I used to go watch them quite a bit in the early 90s, kind of Gavin Peacock, Jakob Kjellberg, Erlen Jonsson, that kind of era. But I never felt an affinity with me and Chelsea. So I'm kind of glad. Yes, they've obviously had ridiculous success in the 2000s and 2010s, but I'm kind of glad I just never really supported them. It was only because my dad knew some people there. So yeah, but Rosenior's gone, and let's see what's next for Chelsea.